let's talk about the Fed. We are at a 50-year low on unemployment. 50-year low. We have seen the power of workers increase in terms of like the first time we've had in I don't know how many, maybe more than a decade, in terms of like any type of significant bump in wages. Now, not enough to have kept pace with productivity over the past 25 years. But in terms of a dynamic, relatively speaking, it's good. Inflation has slowed significantly. And yet the Fed is still insistent on disciplining labor. And we've talked about this over the past couple of weeks. I mean, austerity is deployed not, ostensibly under the cover of preventing inflation. We don't want the debt to get run away. We don't want the deficit to get run away. But it really is deployed as a way of disciplining labor, of making sure that labor doesn't become too powerful, both in terms of like as it is exhibited through wages, but in terms of working conditions, in terms of ability to move from job to job. And here is Larry Summers taking credit for influencing the Fed's, I want to say inexplicable pursuit of rate hikes, but it's perfectly explicable if you feel that workers have gained too much power, that they're too willing to stage some type of labor actions. They're too willing to switch jobs, to quit jobs. They're too willing to ask for a raise or higher working standards. Then all of a sudden what Powell's doing is not a miscalculation at all. It is, in fact, deployment of austerity in the form of raising interest rates. And here's Larry Summers in today's episode of completely oblivious to how we come off. There should be a, like, how they do that rating of your Zoom backgrounds?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, they should do one on the scale of how much of an oligarch do you come across as?
I've been speaking in a different way about
Sorry, just pause it. If you can hear that sort of roaring, what you're hearing is the ocean, if you're just listening, the ocean, which is visible behind him, the bright blue ocean on this nice morning.
Yeah, I mean, he is in, he had a choice too. He could be like, I'm going to shoot this in my hotel room.
Put a wall behind it.
Or I'm going to show everybody that I'm literally, I don't know, is it like Hawaii or is it, or some Caribbean island or, I'm in some vacation getaway. I mean, literally looks like he's in paradise.
I've been speaking in a different way about the Fed in the last couple of months than I had been before. And that's because, for whatever reason, they have come around to views quite close to mine. They think inflation is the primary concern. They explicitly recognize that there's going to need to be increases in unemployment.
Now pause it. I want you to go back. Understand when he says they believe that inflation should be the primary concern. There are two mandates that the Fed has. One is keep inflation in check. And the second is try and provide for as much employment as possible. And the beauty of the way that they set this up was it implies, too, that there is a tension between these two things, that they're necessarily two sides of a coin. And the idea is we need to stand the coin on its edge. So that's perfectly balanced there. But the fact is that if you look at wage increases, it is not wages that is driving inflation. It is not a outmatched demand relative to supply that is driving inflation. Maybe in specific sectors because of in the wake of COVID, but profiteering and using these excuses and, frankly, monopoly power have been driving up prices. And the monopoly power that comes from things like, oh, there's a logistics problem. I'm the only supplier of this. Or, oh, there's a logistics problem. I'm Amazon. I'm going to say I'm going to use monopsony. I'm going to say that, like, look, I usually buy 30 of these things. Well, I'm buying 70, and you're not selling it to anybody else.
Yeah, and it's always frustrated me, this whole conversation, the way they use inflation, because like from our perspective, inflation is like the cost of milk or eggs or something like that. From them, I think they really are thinking like the cost of labor, like what does a worker cost, and we want to make sure that, and that's not to say that that's what's the cause for like the inflation that we all accept now, but they do not want to see that change at all.
And I don't even think it's just the cost in and of it. Like what are the wage increases? I really do think it is like, we need control over the workers.
Right.
They can't have the ability to switch jobs. They can't have the ability to find health care outside of employment. They can't have the ability to require better working standards, or like we saw with the freight trains, force us to hire more workers. Because we need to, extract as much profit as possible from this. And we need the flexibility that comes with having a disempowered workforce, broadly speaking. So it's not even the wages directly in that moment. That's why, like, I think the mistake that as we were talking last week with our guest, Claire
Matai?
Claire Matai. Matai. She was pointing out that this type of austerity comes part and parcel with our capitalist system. This is the way that it sort of deflates any type of threat that may come from an empowered labor. But here is Summer bragging about, like, by some stroke of who knows what, the Fed is sounding a lot like Larry Summers recently. Or maybe it's just that they're cut from the exact same cloth and they have the exact same agenda.
I've been speaking in a different way about the Fed in the last couple of months than I had been before. And that's because, for whatever reason, they have come around to views quite close to mine. They think inflation is the primary concern. They explicitly recognize that there's going to need to be increases in unemployment to contain inflation. They recognize the salience of labor market developments as a kind of super core measure of inflation. They're showing awareness of the fact that the neutral interest rate is a real interest rate concept rather than a nominal interest rate concept. They're recognizing that the trade-off is not between unemployment and inflation, but between unemployment and the level of entrenched inflation. These are the kinds of points that I've been stressing on your show for the past 18 months. And I think I'm gratified.
All right, do we need to hear the rest of it? There's nothing. But that point about entrenched inflation, okay? He's arguing if we don't disempower labor right now, i.e. increase unemployment, if we don't do that right now, this inflation is going to stick around here. But that does not account for the fact that the inflation rate has dropped significantly. Yes, we are still 7 points of inflation year over year. But 6 months ago, we were at 9.5 points of inflation, which means that the rate of inflation is decreasing. The trend is going in the right way, which explicitly contradicts the idea that this is durable. There's no doubt that some stuff is going to stay, prices are going to be raised because, you go get a slice of pizza right now and it's in some places like $1.50 more than it was 2 years ago. But that's because they know they can get away with it. Yeah. The expectations have changed. We were all sold this, there's, broad inflation. Milk is now $8 a gallon. But in fact, what was really going on in a lot of instances, not all the instances, was that you had CEOs and corporations that were basically saying, we can jack up prices right now. And
blame Brandon. I mean, that's an awesome opportunity.
And blame Brandon. Or we don't have to invest in we can take a year off from our capital investments so that we don't need to provide an increase in supply, because our agenda is not to make sure that supply in this one sector meets demand as much as our profits continue to grow. And one of the ways that we can grow our profits is instead pull back on investment in machinery or our productive capacity. Because remember, they had to pull back during COVID. Everybody did. Less workers, less products coming in to resell, less components coming in which to make things, and they could have a choice. Do we expend the money to reinvest in our productive capacity to get back to where we were in 2019 and produce as much as we were in 2019, or do we just wait, make up the difference with profit? We'll sell less widgets, but we're going to charge 25% more because we don't have the ability to make as many widgets as we did before. So what used to be a volume business for us, we make a nickel on every widget and we sell 1,000. Well, now we can make 12 cents on every widget and sell 500. And incidentally, what also happens in that instance is not just that our profits go through the roof, my personal stock portfolio does too. Because my compensation is a function of my ability to cut costs. My compensation is a function of what our stock is doing, and Wall Street will reward you for cutting costs and increasing profits. I mean, so there it is. That's what's going on here. And he is loving it. And why wouldn't he? Because he's, look at that picture. Just don't even put up the video. Just put it, I mean. Man,
I'm hearing like the White Lotus music.
What kind of ghoul do you have to be like, I mean, maybe he's constantly on vacation. Maybe he's constantly on vacation, so he doesn't like, oh, I'm going to take a little time from my time in paradise to go and applaud the fact that we are punishing workers.
Thousands of people that just have to be like, we're going to immiserate you.
Millions,
yeah, exactly.
Millions. But we're doing it for the greater good. And by greater, I don't mean in terms of sheer numbers. I mean greater in terms of like, I'm better than you.
Yeah. And like we talk about like the deep state, and that just makes, I think, libertarians a little bit too, but this guy is part of like the state in a sort of way. Like he's making these giant determinations, like in a command and control economy. Just get back off of Summers there. Like we would see that as a decision the state's making. Instead, it's just like our capitalists get to decide, like, oh, people are going to struggle.
This was Larry Summers' shared sacrifice moment. We're all going to have to share a sacrifice. Like for me, part of my sacrifice is right now I could be sitting on the beach, or I could be sitting on the beach, or getting a
completely empty beach with plenty of seating there, like, but nobody else.
I could be sitting on the beach, or I could be at the spa right now getting a pedi, but no, I'm coming on, where is it, CNBC, and talking about how Bloomberg and rooting on the fact that we need to disempower workers. Shared sacrifice, ladies and gentlemen. That's called shared sacrifice.